Step out. I smell marijuana.
There's no marijuana. What's the legal basis for extending this stop?
You getting smart with me, boy?
Repeat that on your body cam and explain your reasonable suspicion.
Out of the car, now.
I'm an FBI agent. I'm reaching for my credentials. Do not escalate.
It was 9:23 p.m. on I-85 just outside Atlanta, Georgia, when a 15-year veteran police officer made a decision based on a smell he claimed to detect the color of my skin, which he could clearly see, and an assumption that would end up costing him everything. His body camera was recording every word, every gesture, and every moment of what was about to unfold. He had no idea that I, the man he was about to arrest, had spent the last decade infiltrating organized crime rings. He had no idea I had testified in over 50 federal cases. And he absolutely had no idea that his own body camera footage would be dissected by Internal Affairs, the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, and used as evidence in a federal lawsuit that would burn his career to the ground. Before I dive into what happened next, if you're someone who believes that knowledge of your rights is the first line of defense against abuse of power, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This story is about to show you exactly why credentials don't matter when prejudice is in the driver's seat. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because what happened on that Georgia highway could happen anywhere in America. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm 36 years old. I hold a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Morehouse College, and I've spent 10 years with the FBI. I have 52 successful federal prosecutions under my belt and have been decorated for valor twice. On that humid June evening, I was driving home from a joint task force meeting with the Atlanta Police Department, ironically, a meeting about improving community relations, when I noticed the patrol car behind me. I wasn't speeding. I was doing 63 in a 65. Both hands were visible at 10 and 2. My registration was current, and my inspection sticker was valid. I learned a long time ago that driving while black meant doing everything perfectly and still getting pulled over. This was my third stop in 6 months. Never a ticket, always a warning. It's always the same questions. Where am I going? Where have I been? What do I do for a living? The lights flashed on at 9:19 p.m. I signaled, slowed down, and pulled into a well-lit gas station parking lot off the exit. Engine off, hands on the wheel, I waited and waited. Officer Reynolds sat in his patrol car for almost 3 minutes, running the plates I knew, checking for warrants that wouldn't exist, making me sweat. Maybe the power play was familiar to you. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them know who is in control. When Reynolds finally approached, I took a deep breath. This was going to be another one of those stops. I could feel it in my gut. Reynolds's flashlight beam hit my face first, bright, deliberate, blinding. Then it swept the interior of my car, passenger seat, back seat. Then it returned to my face. License and registration, Reynolds said. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. Absolutely, I said calmly. Can you tell me why you pulled me over? License and registration first. I reached slowly for my glove box. I called out every single movement. I'm reaching for my glove box now, getting my registration and insurance. I retrieved the documents. Now I'm reaching for my wallet in my back pocket. I got my license and handed everything through the window. Reynolds took them without a word and disappeared back to his patrol car. 4 minutes this time. When he came back, his body language had changed. Shoulders squared, jaw tight. The flashlight was pointed down now, but I could see his face clearly in the gas station lights. I recognized that expression. I'd seen it in interrogation rooms, in courtrooms, and in the eyes of racketeers who knew they were caught but weren't ready to admit it. It was the look of someone who had made up their mind before they had all the facts. Mr. Thorne, Reynolds said, putting deliberate emphasis on the Mr. You're in a pretty nice car for someone from your neighborhood. I felt my jaw clench, but I forced it to relax. I live in Buckhead. My neighborhood is pretty nice. Is there a problem with my documentation? Where are you coming from tonight? A work meeting. Am I being cited for something? What kind of work? I'm a federal agent, FBI. Can you tell me the reason for this stop? Reynolds' eyes narrowed. Sure you are. Your taillight is out. I glanced in my mirror. Both lights were clearly working, reflecting distinct red light off the gas station's white concrete wall. Officer, both my tail lights are functioning. You can see them from here. Failed to signal when you changed lanes about a mile back. I didn't change lanes. I've been in the right lane since I left the parking garage downtown. You were weaving. I wasn't weaving, and I think we both know it. Reynolds leaned down his face, now level with my window. You getting smart with me, boy? There it was. Boy. In that particular tone, the one that carries centuries of weight. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest. I'd heard it before, from suspects, from witnesses, from people who looked at my badge and my skin color and couldn't reconcile the two. But coming from another cop on an official stop, that hit different. I'm being respectful and factual, I said, keeping my voice dead level. And I'm asking you, as is my right, to provide the legal basis for this stop. Step out of the vehicle. On what grounds? I smell marijuana. I almost laughed. Almost. Because this was textbook. When you can't justify the stop, you manufacture probable cause. Claim a smell that can't be objectively verified on camera. Escalate the situation until the driver gets frustrated, then claim the frustration is suspicious behavior. Officer Reynolds, I said, reading his name badge, there is no marijuana in this vehicle. There is no smell of marijuana. And inventing probable cause is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights and your duty as a law enforcement officer. You trying to tell me how to do my job? I'm reminding you of the constitutional limitations on your job. Under Rodriguez versus United States, you can't extend a traffic stop beyond its original purpose without reasonable suspicion. Under Terry versus Ohio, that suspicion must be specific and articulable. A fabricated smell doesn't qualify. Reynolds' face went from stern to furious red, creeping up his neck. Oh, so you're a lawyer now too? I work with lawyers every day. Federal prosecutors putting away actual criminals while you're out here harassing citizens for driving through your jurisdiction. Officer, I won't ask you again. Step out of the car. I will as soon as you tell me the reason. I have a right to know. The smell alone is enough. You're clearly in possession of drugs. I couldn't help it. I smirked. I'm not. I know exactly what that smell isn't because actually I'm an FBI agent. Reynolds' hand moved to his service weapon. Yeah, sure you are. Get out of the car. You're under arrest. For what crime? Possession of a controlled substance and obstruction. I'm a federal agent. I'm going to reach for my credentials slowly. They're in my jacket pocket. I moved my hand with exaggerated care, pulled out the leather credential case and opened it to show my silver badge and ID card, holding it up to the window. Reynolds snatched it from my hand, examining it under his flashlight. I watched his face. I saw the moment it registered. The badge was real. The ID was real. This wasn't some street dealer with a fake badge bought off the dark web. This was an actual federal agent. And everything Reynolds had just said and done was now documented on his own body camera in an interaction with someone who knew exactly how illegal it all was. Reynolds stood there for a long moment, turning the credential case over in his hands. I could see the wheels turning. I could practically hear his internal monologue. How do I get out of this? How do I save face? How do I make this look like anything other than what it obviously is? This could be fake, Reynolds finally said. but his voice had lost its certainty. The words came out flat, unconvincing, even to himself. Call it in. The numbers are on the back of the ID card. FBI, Atlanta Field Office. They'll confirm my status in about 30 seconds. So, Reynolds pulled out his cell phone, not his radio. I noticed that immediately. He didn't want this call going over official channels where it would be logged, where other officers might hear, where his sergeant might ask why he needed to verify federal credentials during what should have been a routine traffic stop. I listened as Reynolds spoke quietly to someone on the phone, gave his badge number, read my credentials, and waited. His expression shifted from defensive to resigned. He ended the call without saying goodbye. They confirmed, Reynolds said. Why didn't you identify yourself immediately? I leaned forward slightly, keeping my hands visible on the steering wheel. Because I shouldn't have to. Because my credentials don't make this stop any more or less constitutional. Because every citizen, regardless of whether they're a federal agent, has the right to ask for reasonable suspicion before being detained and searched. Because if I flash a badge and suddenly I'm treated with respect, what does that say about how you treat everyone else who doesn't have one? The question hung in the humid air. Reynolds opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. You were just what? Doing your job. Your job is to have reasonable suspicion before initiating a stop. Your job is to articulate that suspicion when asked. Your job is to respect constitutional rights regardless of who you're dealing with. Instead, you profiled me, lied about your reasons, fabricated probable cause, and escalated when I exercised my rights. That's not police work. That's abuse of authority. Reynolds stood there, my credentials in one hand, his flashlight in the other. I could see the calculation happening. I could see him trying to figure out how to de-escalate without admitting he'd screwed up. How to maintain authority while backing away from an arrest that would never survive scrutiny. The smell is probably coming from your work clothes, Reynolds finally said. You probably handle drugs in your job. My work clothes are in an evidence locker at my office. I'm wearing a suit, and the smell you claimed to detect 3 minutes ago has now become probably coming from something else, which means it was never there in the first place. Look, I'm trying to cut you some slack here. I don't want slack, I replied. I want you to articulate your reasonable suspicion for this stop, because so far you've claimed a taillight that works a lane change that didn't happen, weaving that you have no evidence of, and a smell that you're now admitting you're not even sure about. That's not police work. That's harassment. Reynolds took a step back from the car. You're free to go. No, that clearly wasn't the response Reynolds expected. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not leaving until you give me your badge number, your supervisor's name, and information about how to file a formal complaint. Because this stop was unlawful. Your questioning was based on racial profiling. And that comment about my neighborhood, combined with calling me boy, makes this a civil rights violation. I never said anything about race. You didn't have to. Your actions said it all. You saw a black man in a nice car and decided he must be a criminal. Then you threw every pretextual excuse at the wall, hoping one would stick. And when I exercised my rights, you escalated instead of de-escalating. That's the definition of bias-based policing. I was just doing my job. Your job is to protect and serve, not to profile and harass, not to fabricate probable cause, not to violate constitutional rights, just because someone doesn't immediately submit to unlawful commands. Reynolds' radio crackled. A female voice asked for his status. He keyed the mic on his shoulder. 10-8, everything's fine here. But everything wasn't fine. I could see it in the way Reynolds kept glancing at the camera mounted on his own chest. The way his hand kept moving to it, probably remembering too late that it had been recording this entire encounter. The way his shoulders had gone from squared and confident to slightly hunched and defensive. "Badge number," I said again. Reynolds rattled it off, gave me the name of his sergeant, the address of the station, all the information I would need. Then he practically threw my credentials back through the window and walked away without another word. I sat there for a moment, letting the adrenaline cycle through, letting my hands stop shaking. Then I drove home. I didn't sleep much. I spent most of the night replaying the stop in my mind, making notes about every detail I could remember. Time, specific statements, the exact sequence of events. By sunrise, I had a comprehensive timeline of everything that had happened. I'd learned this documentation process from cases I'd worked. Drug dealers who got arrested on bad stops had their cases thrown out, not because they were innocent, but because the stops were unconstitutional. Evidence obtained illegally cannot be used. It's called the exclusionary rule. And I'd seen dozens of guilty people walk free because officers cut corners, violated procedures, or lied about their reasons for initiating contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same constitutional protections that frustrated me in my work, watching dangerous people go free on technicalities, were now my shield against abuse. That's what the Constitution does. It protects everyone, even when that protection feels inconvenient, even when it means guilty people walk. Because the alternative, a system where police can stop search and arrest anyone based on hunches and bias, is far worse. At 7 a.m., I called Sarah Jenkins, my liaison at the Department of Justice. I explained what had happened. Reynolds' body camera had captured everything. Within 2 hours, Jenkins called back. "Marcus, this is bad. Really bad. That officer just handed you a federal civil rights case on a silver platter. I know the NAACP is already interested. They've been tracking this precinct. This isn't the first complaint against Reynolds. It's the 12th. 11 other people had reported Officer Reynolds for misconduct, and he was still on the streets, still pulling people over, still violating rights with impunity. Because those 11 people probably didn't have badges, probably didn't have lawyers on speed dial, probably didn't have the specialized knowledge I had. Why wasn't he stopped after complaint number 3, I asked, or 5, or 7? Jenkins sighed. Same reason most cops with patterns never get stopped. No video evidence, conflicting statements. He said, she said. Internal Affairs investigates, finds no conclusive proof of misconduct, and closes the case. The complaints go in his file, but they don't trigger discipline unless there's something undeniable like this. So 11 people had to suffer through his bias before someone with enough documentation and legal knowledge could force accountability. That's how it works, I said. Unfortunately, that's how it's going to stop working. Do you think body cameras should be mandatory for all law enforcement, including local police? Let me know what you think in the comments, because what happened next shows exactly why documentation is so crucial. Jenkins immediately contacted the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Within hours, they requested Reynolds' body camera footage from the stop. The footage was damning. Every word I had spoken, every changing justification, Reynolds had given every lie about tail lights and lane changes, every racial dog whistle, all captured on Reynolds' own camera. But it wasn't just my complaint that triggered action. Jenkins also contacted Atlanta City Council member David Carter, who had been pushing for police accountability measures for 3 years. She reached out to Chief Eleanor Vance, who had publicly stated her commitment to eliminating racial bias in traffic stops. And she notified the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, which had been monitoring the Atlanta PD for pattern and practice violations. On June 17th, exactly 9 days after the stop, Officer Reynolds was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The investigation wasn't just about my stop. Once the FBI started pulling records, they found a pattern. Officer Reynolds had made 347 traffic stops in the previous year. 68% of those stops were of black drivers in a district that was only 22% black. Of those stops, only 9% resulted in citations, which meant 91% of the stops were pretextual, initiated without actual violations, escalated through fabricated probable cause, and ended without formal charges, because there was never anything illegal happening in the first place. The FBI's review went deeper. They pulled audio recordings from Reynolds' patrol car computer, cross-referenced his radio calls with dispatch logs, and interviewed 47 people he'd stopped in the past 18 months. What emerged was a disturbing portrait of an officer who had essentially been conducting a personal campaign of harassment disguised as law enforcement. One woman, Maria Rodriguez, a teacher, had been stopped 3 times by Reynolds in 8 months. Same area, same time of evening after her shift ended. Each time he claimed a different violation: rolling through a stop sign, expired inspection, suspicious vehicle matching a bolo description. Each time he searched her car with a drug dog after she refused consent. Each time the dog alerted, which she later learned happens in 80% of stops, regardless of actual contraband presence, and no drugs were found. She had filed a complaint after the second stop. It went nowhere. Another man, James Bennett, an architect, was stopped twice in 1 week. Both times, Reynolds claimed he looked nervous. Both times he demanded to search the vehicle. The second time, when Bennett invoked his Fourth Amendment rights, Reynolds made him wait on the side of the highway for 45 minutes while a K-9 unit was dispatched. The dog never alerted. Bennett missed his daughter's birthday dinner. His complaint also went nowhere because there was no video evidence of misconduct, just illegal detention that went on far longer than necessary. The pattern was clear. Reynolds targeted people who looked like they didn't belong in affluent neighborhoods. People whose cars were nice enough to suggest economic success, but whose skin color triggered his assumptions about criminality. The investigation revealed something else, something my sharp observation had caught, but the department had missed. In his interview with Internal Affairs, Reynolds claimed the stop was legitimate based on a broken tail light. When investigators examined my car, both tail lights were functioning perfectly. When they pulled maintenance records, both lights had been replaced 6 months earlier and had logged 0 malfunctions. When they reviewed Reynolds' body camera footage, which he'd conveniently forgotten to mention initially, it showed my vehicle, with both taillights, clearly illuminated before the stop was initiated. He had lied. Not just to me, not just in his report, but to Internal Affairs investigators under oath. The Internal Affairs report was delivered to Chief Vance on August 2nd, 47 pages long. I obtained it later through a Freedom of Information Act request. The key findings were devastating. Reynolds initiated the stop without reasonable suspicion. He fabricated multiple justifications. He engaged in racially biased conduct. He failed to de-escalate. He filed a false report. He lied to investigators. The recommendation was clear: immediate termination. On August 9th, Officer Reynolds' 15-year career in law enforcement ended. The termination letter cited gross misconduct, racial bias in policing, false statements under oath and conduct unbecoming an officer. His appeal was filed on August 16th. It was denied on September 3rd after the appeals board watched the body camera footage and reviewed the pattern of complaints. But I wasn't done. On September 15th, with representation from the NAACP and my wife's law firm, I filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983 against Officer Reynolds personally and the Atlanta Police Department. The complaint alleged violations of my Fourth Amendment rights and 14th Amendment rights. The city fought it for 6 months, arguing qualified immunity. But my citing of specific case law, like Terry and Rodriguez during the stop, made it hard for them to argue the law wasn't clearly established. The footage showed Reynolds never asked if I needed help dismantling their community caretaking defense. By December 2025, the city's legal team realized they were going to lose. On March 22, 2026, the case settled. The terms included $490,000 in damages and attorney's fees. But the real victory wasn't the money, it was the consent decree. The Atlanta Police Department agreed to implement mandatory body cameras with no discretion to turn them off. They created an early warning system, flagging officers with complaint patterns. They established a community oversight board with subpoena power. As for Officer Reynolds, he tried getting hired by 3 other departments in Georgia. All rejected him. Last I heard, he's working private security and was recently let go for aggressive behavior. I'm still with the FBI, still doing the work I'm passionate about, but I've also become an advocate. I speak at police academies about constitutional policing. The footage from my stop is now required viewing at the academy not as a gotcha moment, but as a lesson on how ego and bias can destroy public trust. 6 months after the settlement data showed traffic stops of black drivers in my district dropped by 34%, while legitimate citations remained constant. The harassment stopped. People ask me what I want them to take away from that night. My answer is simple. This could have gone a completely different way if I didn't have a badge, federal connections, and legal knowledge. I might have ended up arrested or worse. And that brings us to the most important lesson I can offer you today. Rights that you don't know are rights you don't have. The Constitution is a powerful shield, but it only works if you know how to hold it up. We have to educate ourselves, not just to protect our own freedom, but to force the system to live up to its promises for everyone. This story is a dramatic retelling based on true events. The names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved, but the legal principles and the reality of the encounter remain true. This article is intended for educational purposes only.